Should we eat fish or should we not? This video is about that. Well, not really. We're actually going to be talking about the environment. A few general tips about environmental debates to start. The main thing we're here to debate about is not whether climate change is real or not. If your opponent is trying to argue that no, climate change is not real, you, as a self respecting person, should stop engaging and leave them to their own devices since they are not worth your time. The realistic scenario is arguing about what type of advocacy is best to combat climate change. Also, don't claim that you'll be able to stop climate change entirely. This is borderline impossible. Unfortunately, you can never fix climate change. It's better to phrase your argument as we can mitigate or substantially reduce the amount of environmental harm caused by climate change. An unfortunate irony of climate change is that the countries least responsible for its causes are also the ones that are most subjected to its effects. Think of Sri Lanka floods or the Myanmar earthquakes, all of which happened just last year. Yet, these environmental issues are also uniquely global, which means that they require global responses. This creates a game theory problem called collective action problem. While each country is affected by climate change, no one singular country can solve those issues. Whereas in the meantime, they benefit from other countries' actions. And if you were the country to implement these pro-green policies, you yourself would suffer more harm, whether it's economical or societal. So naturally, no country wants to be the one to start. They're always waiting for other countries to do something. The ones harmed the most are also usually the ones without sufficient resources to implement green technology. So the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Another unfortunate side effect is that wealthy countries would only help if they feel enough empathy for poorer countries harmed because they themselves don't feel the brunt of climate change. Now, let's move on. What do people debate about regarding climate change? I'm going to split this into 4 main points then. First, on environmental harms versus economical harms. Second, on individual contribution and large-scale green tech. Third, on eco-terrorism. And fourth, what does the current state of environmental movement look like? So, starting with the first one. How do we balance the environmental harms and also the economic harms? Arguing for environmental harms is quite easy. First, you can say climate change threatens our very existence and our very survival. Nothing else can top this. Second, climate change is likely to harm the most disprivileged, so it should be our priority to limit this humanitarian crisis. Third, climate change is also uniquely long-term and irreversible. So, other harms, by comparative, can always be solved later. On the side of economic harm, however, a good point to bring up is that first, we need short-term economic stability to effectively tackle climate change. Your government needs to feel like the economy is stable first before they can think about your next generation, as the current generation will never be the ones to suffer the true brunt of climate change. So, we need them to spare enough empathy and feel enough stability to convince the government to fund green technology. Even if you don't believe this, let's say the government managed to implement one environmental friendly policy. This will lead to them thinking, oh, problem solved, and then they won't focus as much on other parts of climate change. So it's not a large enough scale of change. Second point is that compared to other social movements, the environmental movement doesn't exactly have a clear goal. Here's what I mean by this. Think about like the goal of decreasing the hatred that police officers feel towards marginalized people, or the goal of getting more women into positions of power. these are relatively achievable goals. Society definitely have the capability to solve these, yet they just lack the willingness to do it. On the other hand, we don't know for sure if green technology can definitely solve these issues. We don't even have enough green tech in the first place to replace all other energy sources to see that. We don't know what the correct solutions are for climate change. For instance, radical proposals like geoengineering might be incredibly important in combating rising sea levels, or they could also be extremely destructive and harmful to our natural ecosystems. We don't know. Hence, it is risky for governments or corporations to invest heavily into environmentally friendly tech, as it is inherently speculative. Okay, so it's hard to convince the government and big corporations. Does this mean we should focus on individual actions then? This brings me to our second clash. Should we prioritize personal responsibility or the creation of green technology? First, though, let's go through what makes for a good form of advocacy. Three things here. First, which side can fix the issue of short-term government incentives? The major problem right now is that people who are in power only focus on how to win their next election. Climate change, to them, is a long-term investment that will not have short-term or quick results. So, it is useless for rallying votes. Also, imagine you as a citizen, your electricity bill goes up in the short run because the government is slowly transitioning into green tech, which would be expensive initially because it's new. Though you could argue it will get better in the long run as more research and investment goes into it. But do voters care? Also, political systems are majorly made up of older politicians and older voting demographics, which by the time climate change becomes worse, they won't be there to see it. Yet, it's important to note that not everyone thinks like this. There are groups that will support parties that focus on solving climate change. However, even if they care about the environment, they probably care about other issues that directly affect them, like the economy. So, should we advocate directly for more green tech investment? Or should we as a society adopt these environmental friendly practices like using paper straws and then slowly change the social narratives? We can use this to make the government realize that, wow, maybe people care about this issue. Maybe my campaign should tackle this issue. It depends on how you weigh your argument to come out with your answer. Secondly, which side can fix the lack of environmental expertise within policymakers then? Yes, the state of the environment affects everyone. However, democratic officials often aren't adequately qualified to come up with the sort of multi-layered policies needed to effectively solve the environmental crisis. So, would the emphasis on personal responsibility create more policymakers who are knowledgeable enough? Or would the focus on green tech development make them more well-read? We don't know. Third, which side can change the goals of consumers and corporations? Unfortunately, a reality we need to admit is that there is a lot of economic disadvantages to being eco-friendly. Big corporations need to use more money to make these products, so that means consumers need to spend more money to buy these products. So, in everyone's minds, why not just produce and buy cheaper carbon-intensive products then? So, would the investment into green technology solve this problem? Or would the change in social norms change their perspective and then change the problem? Both sides have the capability to solve these problems as long as you know how to argue for them. I ended each argument with a little thought exercise you guys can try out. Try thinking about how either side can win. Moving on, let's talk about eco-terrorism. This looks like groups like Extinction Rebellion or Just Stop Oil. They are groups that adopt radical strategies, which means embracing controversial tactics like the use of violence or the use of property destruction. So, why could this be bad? This is probably quite intuitive, but I'll still break it down for you. First, when you are destroying public property, people will probably just think of you as a nuisance and want you gone, rather than thinking about your reasoning behind the action. Secondly, governments, rather than listening to you and implementing your ideas, will probably just focus on how to shut you down because you have presented yourself as a group that disrupts public peace. Thirdly, even if positive change occurs, this will just make other social movements want to take these drastic measures to be heard as well, which encourages violence in society. But fret not, there are ways to defend this. First is the obvious: any attention is good attention. Or you can bite the bullet and say that we don't care about people's well-being right now. We care more about the environment. This argument, however, focuses a lot more on the principle of things. It would be morally correct to say that the reason you're going so extreme is because you want to ensure your livelihood. So, principally speaking, you being able to live does indeed outweigh everything else. So, the next time you see them on the news, maybe spare a few minutes to think about the reasoning behind their actions. Final point. Here's some info on the current state of environmental movements or environmental issues in general. This is a quick fire round. I'm going to split this into 3 parts. First, on international environmental pacts. Second, on for-profit organizations. And third, on political lobbying. Starting off then, with the first one. There are 2 main types of international pacts. First is the Paris Climate Accord, which is non-binding and voluntary. All countries are encouraged to participate. Second is the Kyoto Protocol. It is legally binding with exceptions made for developing economies. Currently, majority of countries follow the Paris Accord, which is non-binding, which means that the current fight against climate change largely depends on the generosity of countries around the world to contribute. Next, we'll talk about for-profit organizations in environmental movements. For-profit organizations mean businesses that sell environmentally friendly products. Should the environmental movement support this? On one hand, this spreads awareness, and companies are likely to listen to activists so they aren't bashed for misrepresentation. On the other hand, commercialization makes them look woke so that they can crowd out discourse around their other abuses or other wrongdoings. Also, it is more profitable to be woke nowadays. Lastly, political lobbying. Here's something to think about. The US fossil fuel sector spent $360 million on lobbying and campaign finance contributions during the 2018 US midterm elections. So take that how you will. Okay, it's the end of the video. Some housekeeping. I am not trying to bash any side of the argument. I am merely giving you all the facts so that you can come up with your own opinion. Happy thinking! Bye! So, should we eat fish? I don't know.